Chapter 3. The Calm Between the Storms, 1984. The year began gently. I had a new psychiatrist. The rehabilitation center was helping me keep focused on my physical recovery, and I started going to the outpatient clinics at St. Michael's. The operation had reduced the pain only a little, but I was very thankful for even that little bit of relief. My arm, however, did not seem any better. In fact, it kept getting worse. My breathing had improved slightly as I had quit smoking. I no longer needed a cane to stabilize me, although climbing stairs was very exhausting. My stamina and body were getting back to a state of equilibrium. My mind and the bolts of pain were another story. The psychiatrists, the hypnotherapist, and the monkey on my back continued. The only thing that stands out in my memory about my new psychiatrist was that his office was located upstairs next to a candy store. Food was playing a bigger role in my life each passing day. Stimulants like chocolate in particular gave me a quick pick-me-up. The chocolate-induced euphoria was my body signaling that I was having a mild allergic reaction. The new antidepressants I started taking helped to a degree, but at a price. Dr. Vogg's methods were the same. Listen to me, placate me, put me on drugs, and set up another appointment in 2 weeks. That made my family feel okay. It seemed I was doing something to help myself, and in their minds, they could feel passively helpful. The only flaw in this process was that I did not feel more in control of my life or much better emotionally, just outwardly more stable. I continued to turn my anger inward and became more depressed. The drugs added confusion to my feelings of despondency. I could only count on the psychiatrist not to turn away when I tried to share my feelings, and he did not comment much about them. A feeling of emotional helplessness took hold. That psychiatrist listened, albeit passively, made it easy to turn to him. No one else wanted to hear about my physical and emotional pains. All I really needed was a good friend, and so the search for one began. The answer to this quest was surprisingly simple. So simple, in fact, I subconsciously kept overlooking it. Eventually, I did find that friend. Those who I expected to listen didn't. Friends and family would nod and say, "That's okay," as they politely distanced themselves from my emotional pain as if it were contagious. This made me feel abandoned, and my distress grew and grew. Increasingly, I felt powerless to cope with my feelings. My sense of abandonment grew until one day I found myself with anxiety so overwhelming I was incapable of reading the comics in a newspaper. What had I done? Why was I being punished again? The victim mentality started to permeate all my relationships. I saw that everyone seemed to be addicted to keeping and making other people dependent on them. These relationships of dependency promoted gratification through control. I consistently faced the same dilemma: assert my independence and be punished for it, or victimize myself and be rewarded with people's approval. The emotional pain just weakened my ability to heal and deal with the trauma. My physical pain kept reasserting itself, defeating me more each time. Lainey and I had had the bond of mutual need as the foundation of our relationship. The accident changed my role to one of dependence. Daily, I anxiously awaited Lainey's return from work as I sat in my recliner, my only comfortable chair. I slowly started seeking alternative coping strategies that did not involve drugs. I started to see Dr. Maui, a family physician who had given up his traditional medical practice to become a hypnotherapist. More than a year had passed since my accident. I had little relief and was willing to try almost anything to deal with my physical and emotional pain. The lightning bolts of physical pain fed off the emotional pain and vice versa. It was a vicious cycle of never-ending pain. I enjoyed my sessions with Dr. Maui and always felt better after them. He used the techniques of positive affirmations through hypnosis. It was my conscious choice to enter a heightened state of receptivity. I began rebuilding my inner self and resolving my problems, yet I was still on the psychiatric roller coaster. Pain still grabbed hold of me constantly, but I was finding distractions and sleep worked. Unfortunately, however, I was not sleeping well. Every night, I woke with an incredible burning sensation in my chest. I thought I was having a heart attack each time. Dr. Prober had taken ECGs, and these tests had indicated there was a heart irregularity, but nothing immediately life-threatening. It was minor compared to what I was going through with constant flashes of pain in my body. "Don't smoke or eat spicy food," he advised. I quit smoking and stopped eating spicy food, but the chest pains and foul tastes in my mouth would not go away. I had to do something. The chest pain on top of the others was destroying my ability to function. Finally, Dr. Prober sent me to a specialist at Mount Sinai Hospital. The test was very simple. Stick a tube down my nostrils and measure the amount of acid in my system. It was not pleasant, but when you are desperate, you will do anything. I had a very bad case of heartburn, and I was told it was common in cancer patients who had a lung removed. When the paralyzed left diaphragm caused my left lung to collapse, my stomach had filled the cavity. My sphincter muscle had weakened, and stomach acids went into my mouth constantly. The specialist said they could operate on the sphincter muscle, but 6 months later the problem would probably come back. It would be better if I tried Tegamit, a new anti-ulcer drug that worked on heartburn. Motilium could also be taken if the problem got worse. These drugs did actually work. I could once more sleep through the night, which was when my body and mind did their best healing. My waning faith in drugs was restored. Now I could eat without throwing up and experiencing heartburn. What a relief it was. I started making up for lost eating time. Food tasted great again. Nothing went to waste. Yet that is where it ended up. On my waist, face, arms, and legs. Thereby creating a new problem. The long-term answer to my problem was not the Band-Aid of food or the Band-Aid of drugs that I had turned to. I felt it had to be simpler than that. The bad news. Personal bankruptcy was becoming a distinct possibility. $10 million was a lot more than I could afford to pay off. My retirement fund was being eaten up rather quickly. Laney's car was in the garage on blocks since I could not drive, and that eased the financial drain. Money did not appear to be a problem. Yet. I retained 2 lawyers, one in Nassau, who did not seem to be doing much of anything except calling or writing when he needed more money, and one in Toronto to talk with the unresponsive one in Nassau and try to get him to do something. It was very frustrating dealing with a distant legal counsel in a country with a small legal community. Their bar association was no help when I contacted them. I realized I had taken for granted our legal system, and now I started to appreciate it and the merit of its accountability to a higher authority, the bar associations. The lawsuit had a price, and it slowly chipped away at our reserves, monetary and emotional. But Laney's climb up the corporate ladder meant more money coming in, so we did not feel a financial crush. My now 2-year-old operation was having frustratingly little effect on my arm. I tried all I could to help my arm improve, but the intercostal nerve graft and transplant had failed. It was time to visit the orthopedic surgeon at St. Michael's Hospital. The good news. Laney and I desperately wanted to have a child. In my case, it was an act of selfishness to reaffirm my existence, motivated by my fear of dying during the next round of surgeries. It gave me hope for a better tomorrow and a sense of purpose. After many months of trying and running to doctors, the good news arrived. Laney had conceived. She was pregnant. My dream of bringing a child into this world would be fulfilled. Selfishness had its place. My stamina was increasing, and that was important, as I feared dying on the operating table. My next surgeries were fast approaching. My breathing was also showing signs of improvement. The weight I was putting on did not help, but Ventolin and other drugs for the asthma, triggered by the accident and made worse by smoking, seemed to help. Physical activity and stopping smoking for a few months were having positive results. I found a great masseuse, Tom, at a fitness facility where I swam and walked. Fortunately, health insurance covered this cost. The physical pain had caused me to drive others away from touching me, but I was overcoming this fear. The walk, swim, and massage were soothing experiences that allowed me to fill my days with peaceful physical activity that reaffirmed my body's sensations and its ability to strengthen and heal itself. In the low lights and calming music of the massage room, I could let my mind listen to itself. I was getting in touch with my inner self again as the massage relaxed my mind and body. Good things happen in threes. And that year I was tested and given back my license to drive. It was a victory for my independence. The orthopedic surgeon. Dr. Rich had the hands of a surgeon and a warm manner that made me feel comfortable. He explained what would be done, an approach which contrasted with the way most doctors had treated me. "Your arm is going to be fused to your shoulder," he said. "This will give it stability. The Steinhedler procedure will enable you to bend your arm up and down. How much practice bending you do will determine your range of motion." I had begrudgingly come to accept pain as part of my life, and Dr. Rich offered no possibilities of help in this regard. I found it difficult to carry on the conversation without grimacing as stabs of pain shot through my side. At least the operation held out hope that I could rid myself of the sling. That would stop people from labeling me as disabled. So much of what people think is based on what they see, which blinded them to the real me. I knew I had to go through with these operations. Selfishness is a great motivator. I wanted very much to be accepted as a whole person again. The sling and the acrobatics I performed to get dressed were painful. I welcomed the surgeries since I wanted to be ready to see my child and have him or her see me as a complete person. If I could not be whole in the baby's sight, then I preferred to die on the operating table. My pain blinded me. I saw life in terms of black and white, yes and no. My surgeries were scheduled for the end of January 1985. Chapter 4. And if the surgery was not enough, 1985. January started with excitement. For the first time, the Bahamian lawyer called without a demand for money. Instead, he had news that the parasailing company had an insurance policy for $250,000, and the insurance company wanted to visit me. The timing was less than perfect. "Sure, I'll be in St. Michael's Hospital undergoing 2 surgeries. It'll be my pleasure to see the insurance people then," I said. It had been over 2 years since the accident, and at last something positive was happening on the financial front. The fact that I was going in for more surgeries substantiated my problem. In that regard, the timing was perfect, almost as if an unseen hand was acting on my behalf. I was beginning to believe I had friends in that other world helping me. Fate works in mysterious ways. I wondered if my guardian angels had interceded on my behalf. Maybe they had. The orthopedic surgeries. Last week of January, first week of February, 1985. Tuesday, January 29th, 1985, was a typical cold winter day. Laney drove me to the hospital and accompanied me to the admitting office. Again, I was the object of a surgeon's desires. Being an object in a human body is easy if all the players are willing, and I was anxious to get the operation over with, but I was also scared to death that I would not live to see my wife give birth. This objectification awoke me to the fact that my body was in my mind. That thought kept me sane. Friends to whom I had tried to explain this would shake their heads as if to say, "That's okay, he's just scared." I was being treated like a child. The next day I was prepared for surgery. I underwent a battery of questions and tests. Dr. Rich asked if he could take pictures of me since they were going to use an experimental material to screw into my arm and shoulder bones for my shoulder fusion. I was a living experiment. I did not fully comprehend this. The metal plate they were using was a different material than normal. I was never told exactly the nature of the difference. Usually after a shoulder fusion operation, another operation would be performed a year later after the two bones had become one. During that second operation, the metal joiner screwed into the bones would be removed to prevent gangrene. I was not told about this normal course of events for a shoulder fusion until after the surgery. The timing for this medical advance and events in my life was too perfect. I realized my good fortune. This new type of plate would not be removed. I was lucky. Fate was dealing me a good hand. Thursday, January 31st, started with my visit to surgery. The operation went well, but afterward, there was a terrible burning sensation in my forearm that would not go away. An out-of-town friend came to visit me in the hospital. Laney, he and I were talking in my hospital room. The shooting pains, post-operative pain, and now this persistent burning sensation in my arm were making it hard for me to concentrate. A nurse armed with a needle came in. "What's that?" I asked. "Morphine. To help you deal with the post-operative pain," she said. "No, I don't want it," I stated, since I had been learning to use my mind power to cope with the pain. The self-hypnosis and affirmations were very helpful only if I had complete control of my mind. "You have to get your shot," she said. Laney and my friend slowly inched out the door. "No," I insisted. Not swayed by my refusal, she gave me the shot of morphine. This external intervention forced my pain to return with a vengeance. I hated the drugs and the people who always claimed to know what was best for me again and again and again. Years of coming to terms with shooting pains went down the drain with one shot of morphine. The morphine released a demonic world, which was suddenly agony. The shooting pains had their way with me. The medical establishment's attempt at imposing relief caused me to take a step back into my past, into a world filled with uncontrollable pain. I forgive the health caregivers, for they do not know what they did. What hurts most was Laney and my friend standing there and watching while I was being raped with drugs. I realized only I would ever be able to take care of my needs, and that no meant no. That weekend, my body, my mind, and soul rebelled. I was angry and frustrated by these crude interventions without my permission, and stood firm with the nurses about blood being taken once a day. It was scary. The nurses seemed like soldiers marching into battle, with me the territory for them to conquer and control. The hospital routine had a rhythm of its own, dressing my wound and taking care of my minimal needs to sustain me for the next surgery. Shift changes brought a flurry of activity that ebbed and flowed. My pain had gotten worse. Now I wanted relief, which meant sleep. An endless flow of pills, nurses, and doctors blended together. My spirits started to pick up by Monday with the expectation of getting the last surgery over with, then going home. Death had knocked at my door often enough for me to know it was not yet my time. I was concerned that the Bahamian insurance representative had not shown up at the hospital. The lawyer I had retained to communicate with the Bahamian lawyer was a sole practitioner who diligently and knowledgeably pursued his work. His small law firm suited my personality. I called him to find out what was happening, and sure enough, he did not know. I guess the insurance company saved a few dollars by not flying someone in to see me at the hospital, but merely called the hospital to see if I was there. Unfortunately, I was. February 5th, 1985. My anxiety vanquished thoughts about lawyers and settlements. I was resigned that I would never get enough to compensate me for my pain, let alone lost income. Money does not make the world go round. It just makes it easier to survive with dignity. The only ones who offered any financial support were my mom, sister, and a wealthy cousin. Fortunately, due to my good financial planning, this help was not needed. My fear of death and concern for my family's well-being was mollified because the year before the accident, I had upped my life insurance. If I died, my wife and child would be taken care of. Those were my thoughts as I looked at Lainey, her figure showing signs of pregnancy as the June arrival date moved closer. The shoulder fusion was my final surgery. The routine of nurses, pills, and post-operative morphine shots went as the doctors had planned. In their minds, I was no worse for wear. I kept my thoughts of violation and anger to myself, since no one listened or interceded on my behalf, anyway. It was a hell of a way to learn you're alone in the world, a lesson I angrily dealt with silently. Never again, I vowed to myself. Never again. Thursday, Lainey drove me home. Before I left, an appointment was set up for the outpatient clinic to track my progress. Oh, what a relief it is. The business bankruptcy proceedings were 2 years old. I answered all the bank's questions. They were finally satisfied that legally they could not touch my disability policies or settlement from the accident. Fortunately, our house was in Lainey's name. The bank actively pursued my partners from the company, who signed papers allowing the bank to deal with me separately. I appreciated their compassion. At least I could have my guarantee to the bank for the $10 million removed. It amazed me that my ex-working partner, the president and principal owner of the company, did not lose his use of his Aston Martin or his huge country chalet, and had gained control over millions of dollars of inventory from the now bankrupt company. I heard that his lifestyle had not changed one iota. He was a brilliant entrepreneur with a grade school education and the shrewdness that comes with having acquired street smarts. Do your homework, he kept telling me, and I learned to apply this lesson to life. It was one gift I got from my association with him. I respected and hated him at the same time. These mixed feelings were frustrating. In February 1985, I was released from my guarantee. The fear of having to declare bankruptcy was removed. My reprieve was contained in a simple letter. Dear Sir, herein find a release from your personal guarantee for the indebtedness of the company, dated April 1981. The pregnant pause. On the surface, life went on. Everything seemed to be okay. Winter became spring as Lainey blossomed. Thoughts of independence and the freedom the insurance settlement would buy, as well as the purchase of baby furniture, filled my mind. I had the good fortune of finding an honest and considerate retailer named Alan. He helped me put together a package of baby furniture and other things that would make the arrival of our child easier. Alan's store, Mother's World, offered everything you could want and more. I enjoyed making occasional trips there to speak to him. His brilliant marketing strategies had my admiration and reminded me of the days selling to retailers. An independent retailer struggling to succeed and exploit the inefficiencies of the marketplace was someone I respected. I told Alan we would become friends. He gently laughed and told me I would have to be the one to pursue friendship because he was notoriously lazy about phoning. I was hungry to make a new beginning, and people who accepted me for who and what I was became very important to me. This was a step in the right direction as I distanced myself from those who wanted me to conform to their ways. That did not work for me anymore. I knew I had to take care of myself. That was the lesson I had learned from my last surgeries. The days were filled with both pain and the excitement of preparing for the baby. Our prenatal classes were an adventure in adjusting to a new reality. The nurse who instructed the classes asked what was wrong with me. I told her about the nerve damage. She could see me grimacing as the pains shot through my body. She looked at my wife and said, "The pain he has is worse than kidney stones or delivery." That was the only time someone candidly acknowledged how bad my nerve damage pain was. I agreed with the instructor, especially since I remembered having kidney stones when I was a teenager. It had been hell, but like pregnancy, it had passed. My pains from the accident, however, never left. May 30th, 1985. That Thursday started as usual. I made Lainey her snack-size meals. I felt useful and enjoyed sneaking lots of good foods like carrots and apples for her and the baby into her lunch bag. Up until then, Lainey's pregnancy was normal. She was feeling fine, and work as a senior consultant filled her days nicely. This was the last week before her maternity leave began. Lainey left for work as usual. I settled into my morning routine of planning for a day of coping and resting and arranging some things for Lainey that weekend. Suddenly, Lainey was back home. I started getting labor pains on the way to work and stopped at the doctor's office. He gave me an internal, said everything was okay, and that I should go home and rest, she said. I discovered this was the way doctors said nature is a great healer, if you give it a chance. They spoke in codes that reinforced their status, and I found myself giving in to this desire to go to the doctors and have them tell me what I already knew. Lainey found herself in the same situation. It's a subtle way that health caregivers make children out of adults, and we seem to want that pampering. The doctors are the winners with this approach. Their paychecks grow bigger the more dependent we act. I was becoming aware of these addictive relationships and how I empowered them. An internal examination at that point in Lainey's pregnancy almost guaranteed she would go into labor, and she did. The false labor pains turned real within the hour. Off to the hospital we went. I had a cassette player and soothing music ready for Lainey's bedside. The delivery and maternity areas are the nicest parts of hospitals. Good things happen there. Lainey was given a private room where she could labor in peace. I had the job of being there for her. Lainey is rather stoic and private, so she kept kicking me out as she moaned, groaned, and writhed in pain. I could relate to this. The moment of delivery grew closer, and the nurse came in and asked, "Do you want an epidural?" "No," said Lainey. Our homework indicated that the relief from an epidural was not worth the risk of incurring distress to the baby and Lainey. I was despairing of the way health caregivers quickly dispensed drugs with little thought to consequences beyond the immediate ones. Pharmaceutical companies did their job by making products available. Doctors played their part by instructing people to use drugs even though they were not always called for. Lainey and I had come to expect that whenever we went to the doctor's office, a prescription would be presented as the answer to our problems. In theory, the approach should work, but in fact, it was being abused as a way of keeping the patient happy. It was fast, easy, and cost-effective to fill out a prescription. Patient and doctor had become involved in a dependency relationship. No quick fixes might mean you switched doctors. I knew there was something wrong with this setup, but I did not fully grasp what it was. Hours passed and Lainey's labor pains escalated quickly. Suddenly I found myself in a cubbyhole-sized change room. Since I had put on over 30 pounds, it was a struggle to get into the hospital pants. The pain was so great, I battled with my sling and useless arm to put on the shirt. The nurses helped me finish dressing. I made it into the delivery room just in time. "It's a girl," the masked doctor said as the nurse took the baby from the doctor, cleaned her, and put her on Lainey's chest. I felt so good. My body tingled. It was exhilarating. The baby had a full head of black hair. We were moved from the delivery room to the recovery area across the hall. Now the fun began. I took 36 pictures in what seemed like minutes. Yeah, for automatic Canon cameras. The tingling I felt in the delivery room stayed with me. My pain temporarily abated. The telephone company benefited as long-distance calls went out to the grandparents. Stephanie Allie Vegotsky became a wonderful reality. I was ecstatic and sad at the same time. I felt I would never be able to give my child a real two-armed hug. Tears of self-pity welled up in me as I talked on the phone. They were mistaken for joy by others. That pain, more than anything else, really hurt. Good news, bad news, continued. The summer and fall of 1985 were a fairy tale existence. People coming and going, fawning over Stephanie. Lainey and I savored the time together. The first night we put the baby in her own room, she started to cry around midnight. I had not gone to sleep as my pains kept me up most of the night. I went into her room and gently reached in and held her to my chest. Juggling the baby in one arm was becoming second nature to me. Stephanie cried until the morning sun had risen, and I rocked through the night with her in my arms. I thought I was calming her, when in truth I was keeping her awake. The next day, I realized my response to her cries was based on the belief that a parent should do something. Ignoring her would have made me feel guilty. I consciously chose to deal with my child differently in the future and not repeat this subconscious guilt-based routine that the world imposes on parents. Changing my approach took a lot of willpower, since I would have to put up with a lot of criticism. Everyone is quick to judge others' parenting ability, especially if it's contrary to their methods. I learned to rely on my own thinking. I began to question the model of child rearing that was based on guilt. The seeds of living consciously in the present had been planted. I was living with the consequences of this awareness. Not all of them were pleasant. By year's end, Lainey started working again, and our fairy tale existence was replaced by a routine for her of taking care of the baby and me. She welcomed the dependencies, and fostering this need brought her satisfaction. I was physically and emotionally victimizing myself, but that was easier to do than to resist. Lainey and I found a wonderful child care provider who worked out of her home. My recently returned driver's license gave me independence. Childcare meant I could keep my routine of going for therapy and to doctors. Actually, I was filled with feelings of inadequacy and fears that I could not handle Stephanie alone. What if I could not pick her up for some reason? What if there was an emergency? I had to deal with these anxieties or I would never progress. I challenged myself daily to take positive actions to deal with my fears and anxieties. I refused to allow myself to give up. I took a CPR course one weekend. The instructors had never before dealt with a person who had only one functioning arm, and I challenged their traditional teaching methods. The bottom line was that I could not properly do CPR. I was dealing with a world of people who did not realize that my arm's inabilities were the small stuff. It was the pain and internal fears that were crippling me. Again, people used only their eyes to determine what was real for them. It is a shallow way to look at life and other people, but it makes it easier for most people to live their lives. They do not have to question their actions. People's misperceptions take the pleasure out of life and build walls between their feelings and interactions, instead of building bridges. The Bahamian insurance company finally decided to pay me the full value of the policy as settlement without going to court. But much paperwork had to be done. Like most matters where lawyers are involved, it went slowly by the clock. This was definitely not to my advantage. $250,000 was a lot of money, but I gladly would have given it all away to get rid of the physical pain. I would have given away all of my worldly possessions to get rid of the pain. This almost came to pass, but for another reason. Lainey and I decided to move to a bigger house. The first house was paid off with the proceeds from my cashed-in retirement funds. Lainey's income had risen sharply as she achieved middle management status at work and gained more responsibilities in her expanding area. The money was there, so we took a risk and made the leap from a small home to a 3,000-plus square foot executive home in a good neighborhood. Others thought the move was extravagant, but we felt we could afford it. It was a lucky and timely move. By the time we moved, greed made the world go real estate crazy, and we could not have afforded to buy our new home at the higher prices. The Christmas holiday was wonderful. A trip to see grandparents, family, and friends in Montreal, and to show off the baby. The year 1985 turned out to be great. I felt others were watching over us, and they were. Chapter 5. The Year of Good Fortune, 1986. The year started off on a happy note. The settlement for the accident was on its way. The baby was healthy. I was taking back control of my life and planning for the future. The insurance company rehabilitation representative was guiding my steps towards independence. All was well, it seemed. Preparations for discovery. Spring was rapidly approaching. The daycare for Stephanie was working out just fine. Lainey won a gold medal for an accounting exam and was graduating as an accountant. As a woman, she was still a minority in the world of accounting and an oddity in terms of her achievements in the accounting firm. The money for my settlement had not arrived, and plans to finance a considerable mortgage on our new home were made. Winter had been a time of further advances for me. The more I did for myself on my own initiative, the less my pain affected me. I made an exciting discovery. The best help I could get started within me. I had learned who my best friend was and hired myself. Risk, taking chances, is a 4-letter word that means I love me. Armed with this knowledge, I began to take on volunteer jobs to continue my reintegration into society's mainstream. Learning to set goals and plans for the move helped me focus clearly on the processes I needed for fulfilling myself. I was building a better future for my child, wife, and more importantly, for myself. In March, the money came through. The lawyer in Nassau received more than $30,000 for doing what appeared to me to be very little. My legal bills in Canada amounted to more than $10,000, so that left me with a little over $200,000. It was a lot, but not enough to make me lose sight of the fact that I wanted to get back into working. I realized work was a privilege I greatly missed. It was play for pay. Meanwhile, the packing, moving, and setting up of the new home took a lot out of me. Constantly, I did things that worsened my pain, but I would not give up. A rocking horse for Stephanie, which took me a year to build, was the best piece of furniture in the new home as far as I was concerned. I assembled shelving, hung pictures, and enjoyed puttering around the house. Dropping Stephanie off at daycare and going for exercise and massage helped me immensely. Researching and investing the proceeds of my settlement was a rewarding experience that helped me strengthen my mental abilities, which had suffered from lack of use. I had used mutual funds as an investment vehicle since I was in my early 20s. They removed me from the impulse to try to make a quick score. I had done a lot of practical research on them. I learned that time was an asset that worked for me with my money, just as it did for my recovery. Investing was a hobby that had turned into a passion. The best part was that by my using mutual funds to invest my mum's money, she gained her financial independence. When my dad died in 1976, he left her with a very small estate, and she started working full-time as a secretary. The job had helped fulfill her, and it was an example I learned from. Independence and thinking for myself became the thrust of my goal setting. Inward turns outward. Summer became fall, and I got involved in volunteer work. The projects were fun and not too demanding. I sat on the board of the North American Chronic Pain Association of Canada, an affiliate of the American Chronic Pain Association. I had discovered the best way to deal with my pain was to make a difference with others who suffered similarly. My focus switched from inward to outward. The more I focused outward from within, the less my pain affected my daily living. That was an earth-shattering discovery, one that had beneficial consequences beyond my wildest dreams. I sensed I was doing what had to be done, even though I was not consciously aware of this. At one board meeting, it became evident that the group needed a federal charity registration, but between the lawyers, doctors, and layperson volunteers, no one offered to lend the funds. That night, Lainey and I decided to lend the organization $1,000 needed for the law firm to do the work involved. The fees were a gift on their part. It was risky, but I had such abundance in my life, I felt I could repay a little bit of what I owed society. Making a difference matters to me. I figured that each action I turned outward increased my sense of inner harmony and slightly decreased the effects of my physical pain. I began to think more about the gift of life I had been given, the trials I had faced, and my unseen guardian angels. The more I focused outward on doing good, the more my body would tingle inside. It acted like a compass. When it pointed north, you can more clearly decide what path to follow. The path seemed to move farther and farther away from traditional medicine toward non-intrusive healthcare choices. The psychiatrist, the hypnotherapist, and the monkey on my back continued. I felt like a bouncing ball, constantly changing psychiatrists. I finally found one in 1986, Dr. I Can't, who actually talked with me. Psychiatry is more of an art form and a matter of personalities than a science. His manner suited me just fine. By the time we met, I had been on numerous types of antidepressants. One was finally working, and I was dealing with my depression and anxiety. 4 years of depression was enough. I came to terms with the fact that part of my body was dying before my very eyes. I discovered pain is a crisis that could help me become a better person, and that I wanted to be whole again. Good news, bad news, continued. It unnerved me to see my arm atrophying, and by 1986, 4 years after the accident, my once firm biceps had turned to a mass of jelly, and the skin on my left hand felt soft and smooth, like a baby's bottom. The arm had pain, and my left hand had areas that were numb and always hurting. It was so numb I accidentally dropped a part of a hot coal on it and did not realize it until I smelt my flesh burning down to the bone. I was learning the hard way that I had to examine my left side visually to make sure it was not infected or damaged. By age 35, osteoporosis due to the nerve damage had taken hold in my shoulder area, so even a small fall could badly damage me. The good news was that there was no big bad news that year. Chapter 6. The Struggles Begin Again, 1987. The year 1987 began wonderfully. I had started to do volunteer work at a community dating service and at a clothing manufacturer. I had to learn to get dressed more suitably for the outside world. 5 years of wearing only jogging pants and loose-fitting tops came to an end. As I started to show the outside world that I had changed, it began to change its attitudes towards me. I discovered that if you want to change others, you have to change yourself. This approach worked. Simply focusing on positive outcomes produced positive results. I decided that my positive words, deeds, and thoughts were the key to my future prosperity. Once this philosophy was applied, I sensed everything would come into focus more quickly. The insurance company's rehabilitation consultant helped foster this notion. At first, I was suspicious of the insurance company's motives, as it was the money, not my well-being, that it was probably most concerned with. Then I realized that the why of the company's motivation was like the why of my accident. Irrelevant. What mattered was that I make the best of the opportunities offered me, and that's what I was doing. The psychiatrist, the hypnotherapist, and the monkey on my back continued. Dr. I Can't had more of a sharing style than the other psychiatrists. He reflected my thoughts back to me. I broke the cycle of self-pity to find myself with a full-blown case of anxiety. It almost paralyzed me. For many months, the anxiety held me in its grasp, but finally I broke free of it. I now had a psychological dependency on drugs, however, and that was something I struggled to conquer. The self-hypnosis, affirmations, hypnotherapist, family doctor, and psychiatrists helped. The hypnosis had the greatest immediate effect. I believe that the antidepressants assisted Mother Nature, but it is also possible that they prevented my body and mind from doing what comes naturally, healing. I started going for massages once a month. The neglect of my body was evident, as I had put on a tremendous amount of weight. I did not want any pictures taken of me. I realized that I would have to deal with this problem, but felt I could delay it until I came to terms with my pain. That meant thinking and planning for weight loss and building my stamina to the next level so I could walk without panting. The more I read, the more the focus switched from weight loss to thinking about my lifestyle. I needed a job or business to fill my time. With money and time on my hands, that became the next focus and folly. Good news, bad news, continued. The good news was Lainey was pregnant again. I made a conscious choice and prepared to remove a major addictive relationship by discontinuing my government disability pension and to start working again. I felt confident about myself. Maybe a little too confident. I was handling even the bad news, events, and pain in stride. I realized that the bad news and events were to build a better me. They were like weights to a weightlifter. They helped build muscles. I was now taking over $1,000 worth of drugs a year and no pain pills. That was good and bad news because the drugs affected my memory and body. I again discovered that things come in threes, and 1988 was going to be a great year, it seemed.